In the winter of 1889, 34 guests checked into Mrs. Bridget Kelly's boarding house in Richmond, Virginia. None of them ever checked out. For over a century, the Richmond City Archives kept Incident Report 1889 to 1 and 12. Sealed under the mayor's orders after the Methodist Church on Clay Street requested the records be destroyed. The police chief resigned mysteriously 3 days after the investigation started. What they found in the basement of that house shocked the community to its core. Tonight I'll reveal the truth about what happened to those 34 souls and why it was too horrifying for society to accept. Before diving in, this channel isn't for everyone. Only for the brave souls daring enough to uncover America's dark past. If you're ready to learn the chilling truth, subscribe and hit the notification bell. Also tell me where you're from in the comments. Are you ready to uncover these forbidden stories? The story of Mrs. Kelly's boarding house starts in 1888, when the Methodist community in Richmond thought they'd found the perfect Christian landlady. The city, still recovering from the Civil War, was bustling with new businesses. The Clay Street Methodist Church, led by Reverend Thomas Whitman, was a symbol of moral authority in this reborn city. Reverend Whitman recommended Mrs. Kelly, a widow with impeccable references, to run a boarding house for ministers and churchgoers. Her house, built in 1854, was spacious and well kept. Mrs. Kelly had served as housekeeper for years, attended church regularly, and was known for her charity. The community embraced her immediately, and the church blessed her boarding house in a ceremony. Her guests were impressed by her hospitality, her homey meals, and nightly Bible readings. Word of her kindness spread quickly, and by Christmas 1888, ministers, missionaries, and travelers began staying at her boarding house. Guests praised Mrs. Kelly for making them feel welcome and comfortable. Some even became unusually attached to the house, staying for weeks or months. Their loyalty was almost religious, and they expressed an emotional connection to the house itself. Mrs. Kelly welcomed their devotion, offering them peace and comfort. It seemed like a paradise, but there was something darker beneath the surface. Please give me a like and subscribe so I can be motivated to create more great videos. In January 1889, Dorothy Ashford, a church organist, hadn't been in contact with her sister Emma for weeks. Emma grew concerned and attempted to visit Dorothy, but Mrs. Kelly repeatedly turned her away with excuses. Finally, on January 28th, Emma arrived early and forced her way into the house. The silence inside struck her as odd. She found the doors locked, and the atmosphere felt suffocating. Determined, Emma made her way to the 3rd floor, where she heard faint sounds behind one of the doors. Mrs. Kelly, holding a small bottle, confronted her, insisting that Dorothy and the others had found eternal peace. As Emma realized the terrible truth that Mrs. Kelly had been giving her guests eternal rest, she fled to the police station, but no one believed her. Mrs. Kelly, the beloved landlady, was a trusted figure in the community, and no one could imagine she was capable of such horrors. Emma's warning was ignored, and the house remained a terrifying secret for years. Emma's persistence led her to Sergeant O'Brien, who reluctantly agreed to accompany her back to Mrs. Kelly's boarding house. When they arrived, Mrs. Kelly greeted them with a smile, offering tea and cookies. She explained that Dorothy had left early that morning for a church emergency in Petersburg and asked Emma to pass along her love. O'Brien, satisfied with the explanation, reassured Emma that it was nothing sinister. Emma, however, remained unconvinced. She had heard Dorothy upstairs and was certain something was wrong. Mrs. Kelly guided them through the house, showing that all the rooms were empty. The strange odor Emma had noticed earlier was gone, replaced by the scent of fresh linens. Mrs. Kelly suggested that Emma had been imagining things, even implying that spinsterhood might cause such confusion. O'Brien, dismissing Emma as hysterical, escorted her out, but Emma knew the truth. Her sister was still somewhere in that house. Emma's claims would have been easily dismissed, but they began to stir unsettling thoughts among Richmond's Methodist community. Mrs. Sarah Patterson, whose brother-in-law had stayed at Mrs. Kelly's boarding house since October, noted that she hadn't received a letter from him in 2 months, which was unusual. Reverend Whitman started to reflect on the ministers and missionaries who had stayed at Mrs. Kelly's house, many of whom had mysteriously stopped communicating or failed to arrive at their next destinations. The disappearances seemed to form a troubling pattern. Brother Pierce, recovering from pneumonia, never returned to his circuit. Mrs. Henderson, a missionary's widow, missed her trip to Baltimore. Gospel singer Thomas Bright failed to perform in Norfolk. These were explained away, but when combined, they raised questions. Dr. Marcus Webb, a physician serving local churches, had treated several guests from the boarding house. They complained of fatigue, confusion, and strange dreams. At first, he attributed it to the stresses of travel. But as more guests came to him with the same symptoms, he grew suspicious. Dr. Webb suspected poisoning, perhaps with a drug like laudanum, which could keep people in a semi-conscious, docile state. It dawned on him that Mrs. Kelly was using this to keep her guests passive, allowing her to continue collecting their rent. If her guests were too confused to make decisions, she could control their finances and estates indefinitely. She could even forge letters to their families, claiming they were too ill or otherwise occupied. The victims she targeted were often solitary travelers with few ties to the outside world, perfect for her scheme. Ministers and missionaries were prime targets for Mrs. Kelly's scheme, often single, constantly traveling, and accustomed to isolation. Dr. Webb's suspicions were confirmed when Emma Ashford came to him in early February, disturbed by her findings. "I've been to the post office," she told him. "Mrs. Kelly has been collecting mail for over a dozen people who supposedly aren't staying here anymore. Letters from banks, lawyers, family members. She's been signing their names, withdrawing money, and selling their possessions." Emma also discovered that Mrs. Kelly had been corresponding with churches and mission societies, targeting single ministers and widowed missionaries. "She's been hunting them," Emma said angrily. "Like a spider drawing them in." Dr. Webb's stomach churned as he asked, "And then what?" Emma's voice trembled as she replied, "I think she's been killing them." While the evidence was circumstantial, too many people had vanished. Too many letters had gone unanswered. Emma's glimpse into the 3rd floor had suggested something far worse was happening. Dr. Webb knew they had to act, but accusations against a well-respected member of the community would need solid proof. Unexpectedly, Mrs. Kelly gave them the chance they needed. She announced she would be leaving for a Christian women's conference in Norfolk for a week, asking the congregation to pray for her safe return. She also mentioned that the house would be empty while she was away. Dr. Webb and Emma decided to break into the boarding house on the night of February 15th. Armed with a lantern, medical tools, and a new camera, they ventured into the basement. The basement was cold and damp, the air thick with a sickly sweet odor. Dr. Webb recognized it as the smell of decay, but Emma was determined to find the truth. They first found typical household items, but in the second chamber, they discovered a disturbing sight. A makeshift laboratory with shelves of opiates, laudanum, morphine, and chloral hydrate, enough to keep a dozen people in a stupor for months. Emma found a wooden box filled with letters addressed to the guests, all forged by Mrs. Kelly to deceive their families. "She's been forging them," Emma said bitterly. The 3rd chamber contained a ledger detailing Mrs. Kelly's financial crimes, stealing from her guests, forging signatures on bank drafts, and even collecting death benefits. But it was the 4th chamber that revealed the true horror, a morgue-like room with wooden tables and large metal containers. Dr. Webb opened the first container and recoiled. Inside was a preserved body, its face serene, as though the person had simply fallen asleep. Emma gasped in horror when she looked in the second container. It contained a woman, her body perfectly preserved, dressed in one of Dorothy's clothes. "That's not Dorothy," Emma whispered, her voice cracking. They found 14 bodies in total, each carefully preserved like dolls. Some were recent, Others had been there for longer, their skin waxy and translucent. Each body was labeled with the name, arrival date, and date of death. Mrs. Kelly had been systematically murdering her guests, preserving them, and stealing from their estates. The evidence was clear. Mrs. Kelly's boarding house was a house of horrors. The dates revealed a chilling pattern. Mrs. Kelly had been killing her guests at intervals, waiting until she had siphoned enough money from their estates. Dr. Webb's medical examination confirmed the horrifying truth. Each victim had died from gradual poisoning, small doses of various toxins administered over weeks or months. The slow death would have been painless, but inevitable, a cruel fate devised by Mrs. Kelly playing God by deciding who lived and who died. She's been arranging their bodies like some twisted religious display. Emma said, her voice shaking with disgust. But the worst discovery came next. In the corner of the chamber, Dr. Webb found a small wooden door leading to a fifth room. Unlike the others, it was warmer and more comfortable with a bed, a rocking chair, and bookshelves. Inside, Emma's sister Dorothy lay unconscious but alive. Her breathing was shallow, and her eyes were open but vacant, her body dressed and posed like the others, hands folded across her chest in imitation of the dead. "Dorothy," Emma cried, rushing to her sister's side. Dorothy's eyes slowly focused on Emma's face. "Is it really you? Or am I dreaming again?" she whispered. Dr. Webb quickly checked her pulse and pupil response. "She's heavily drugged," he said, "but I think she'll recover. We need to get her out of here now." As they helped Dorothy to her feet, Emma noticed a placard on the bedside table, identical to those on the bodies in the other room. It read, "Dorothy Ashford, arrived December 3rd, 1888. Departed March 1st, 1889. Mrs. Kelly had planned Dorothy's death, keeping her alive just long enough to drain her estate before she would join the other bodies in the zinc-lined coffins. "We need to get to the police," Dr. Webb urged, helping Dorothy along. "We have to stop her before she comes back." But just as they reached the stairs, a sound froze them in place. The front door creaked open, followed by the deliberate footsteps of Mrs. Kelly above them. She had returned early, and now she knew they had discovered her secret. The footsteps moved slowly, purposefully, like a deadly waltz, crescendoing as she approached the basement door. Dr. Webb quickly extinguished the lantern, plunging them into darkness. They held their breath, trying to remain as still as possible, listening to the sound of their own heartbeats and Dorothy's labored breaths. Then Mrs. Kelly's voice drifted down to them, sweet and calm, humming a hymn. Nearer, my God, to thee, as if she were leading a church service rather than stalking them in her house of horrors. "I know you're down there," she called, her tone almost casual. "Dr. Webb, isn't it? And dear Emma Ashford, I saw your footprints in the snow outside. Such a shame. I had hoped we could resolve this matter more peacefully." Mrs. Kelly's voice rang out calm, but filled with disturbing pride. The basement door creaked open, and a sliver of lamplight cut through the darkness. Her shadow loomed at the top of the stairs, its long form distorted by the angle of the light. "You've seen my work," she continued, her voice swelling with pride. 34 souls at rest. 34 spirits freed from the burdens of earthly existence. I've been doing the Lord's work." Dr. Webb motioned for Emma to take Dorothy toward a far corner of the basement, where another set of stairs led to the outside cellar doors. They might escape if they could reach them without being seen. But Dorothy was barely conscious, her legs failing to support her. Every step they took echoed like thunder through the stone chambers. Mrs. Kelly's humming stopped abruptly. Now, she said with a stern maternal tone. "Don't make this more difficult than it needs to be, Dr. Webb. As a medical man, surely you understand that what I've done is merciful. No more pain, no more suffering, no more fear of death. I've given them the gift of peace." She began descending the stairs, her lamp casting wild shadows on the walls. Emma caught a glimpse of her face in the flickering light. Her mask of Christian benevolence gone, replaced by something cold, calculating, and utterly mad. You see, I discovered something wonderful during my first year in Richmond. Mrs. Kelly continued, growing closer. These traveling preachers, these missionaries, these lonely church folk, they all have the same dream. They want to be taken care of, loved, and to find a place where they can rest and be at peace. I simply gave them what they wanted. By now, Emma and Dr. Webb had reached the far chamber. But Dorothy collapsed against the wall, unable to go any further. Her breathing was shallow, growing more labored with each passing second. Emma realized with rising horror that the drugs Mrs. Kelly had been giving Dorothy were now pushing her toward a deadly overdose. "She needs medical attention," Dr. Webb whispered urgently. "If we don't get her to a hospital soon." The beauty of it, Mrs. Kelly's voice continued from the main chamber, now echoing in the basement, is that they were all so grateful. Even at the end, when they realized what was happening, they thanked me. They understood that I was giving them the greatest gift of all, release from the veil of tears. Emma could hear Mrs. Kelly moving through the laboratory, examining the evidence. They had disturbed bottles clinking and papers rustling as she reorganized her files. "Of course, I couldn't let them suffer, Mrs. Kelly." Kelly went on, her tone now as casual as if discussing the weather. "The Lord kept them comfortable, kept them peaceful. They would drift in and out of consciousness, dreaming beautiful dreams. Some of them told me about their visions, angels, golden light, the voices of loved ones calling them home." Dr. Webb had been examining the cellar doors, but they were locked with a heavy iron bar. They were trapped in the basement with a mad woman who had already murdered 34 people and was preparing to make them her next victims. "Dr. Webb." Mrs. Kelly's voice called from the second chamber. "I know you're wondering about my methods. As a physician, you must appreciate the precision involved. Each guest required a different approach. You see, the dosage had to be calibrated to their size, their age, their health. Too little and they might recover. Too much and they would die too quickly before I could properly arrange their affairs." Emma looked around, desperately searching for another way out. The basement windows were too small for an adult, and the stone walls were solid. The only way out was through the main stairs, and Mrs. Kelly was blocking that road. "I kept meticulous records." Mrs. Kelly continued, her voice growing closer. "Each guest's spiritual journey, their final words, their monetary contributions to my ministry." "Yes, that's what this is, a ministry. I'm called to gather God's lonely children and shepherd them to their eternal rest." The lamplight brightened, casting long shadows into their chamber. Emma saw Dorothy's lips turning blue, her breathing growing more irregular. The drugs were taking their toll, and the stress of their escape was pushing her toward a fatal overdose. "Dorothy needs Ipecac," Dr. Webb whispered urgently. "Something to make her vomit up whatever's still in her system. Without it..." He didn't need to finish the sentence. Emma understood her sister was dying, and time was running out. Mrs. Henderson was particularly peaceful. Mrs. Kelly's voice echoed from the next chamber as she examined the preserved bodies. "Such a blessing to witness someone's transition from this world to the next." Emma made a desperate decision. She squeezed Dorothy's hand and whispered, "I'll be right back." She crept toward the main chamber where Mrs. Kelly's voice was coming from. The older woman was standing with her back turned, arranging flowers around one of the zinc-lined coffins. She had changed into a white dress, looking like a twisted angel of death. The lamp sat on a nearby table, casting her enormous shadow on the stone wall. "Ah, Emma dear," Mrs. Kelly said without turning. "I was wondering when you would join me. Your sister is quite ill, isn't she? The transition can be difficult for some souls. They cling to earthly existence even when paradise awaits." Mrs. Kelly said, her voice dripping with sickening sweetness. Emma's eyes flicked to the table next to the lamp. There it was, Ipecac syrup. Exactly what Dr. Webb had said Dorothy needed. But Mrs. Kelly was standing between Emma and the medicine, and Emma knew she had only one chance to reach it. Why, Emma asked, trying to keep Mrs. Kelly talking, while subtly positioning herself to make a dash for the bottle. Why did you kill all these people? What did they ever do to you? Mrs. Kelly finally turned, revealing a face streaked with tears. But they weren't tears of remorse. They were the tears of someone in religious ecstasy convinced she was doing God's work. They were suffering child, she said, her voice drenched in compassion, though it made Emma's blood run cold. Lost souls wandering in spiritual darkness, afraid of death and what lay beyond. I showed them the way home. You murdered them! Emma spat, her voice shaking with fury. You drugged them, killed them, and stole their money. I provided for their physical needs, while they prepared for their spiritual journey. Mrs. Kelly corrected gently. The money they gave me was used to maintain this sanctuary, to care for other lost souls who would come after them. It was all part of God's plan. Behind Mrs. Kelly, Emma could see Dr. Webb emerging from the shadows, carefully moving toward the stairs. If she could keep Mrs. Kelly distracted just a little longer, Dr. Webb might be able to get to the police. What about Dorothy? Emma demanded. She has a life, a job, people who love her. You had no right to decide her fate. Mrs. Kelly's expression softened, pity flooding her features. Dear Dorothy came to me broken-hearted and lost. Her fiancé had died in a railroad accident 2 months before their wedding. She felt she had nothing left to live for. I simply offered her the peace she was seeking. Emma froze, confused. She never told me about any fiancé. Mrs. Kelly smiled, her tone almost maternal. Oh, my dear child, there was no fiancé. Poor Dorothy was suffering from what the doctors call melancholia, a disease of the mind that made her see tragedy where none existed. She was quite mad, you know. I was simply helping her find release from her tortured thoughts. The revelation hit Emma like a physical blow. Mrs. Kelly had been poisoning Dorothy's mind, along with her body, using drugs to implant false memories and delusions that justified her eventual murder. You're the one who's mad, Emma whispered, horrified. Am I? Mrs. Kelly asked, stepping closer. Look around you, child. Look at the peace on their faces. Look at the serenity in their expressions. These souls died knowing they were loved, knowing they were cared for, knowing their suffering was over. How many people can say the same about their final moments? Emma saw her chance. Mrs. Kelly had moved far enough from the table, and Emma could now reach the ipac syrup if she moved quickly. She lunged forward, grabbing the small brown bottle, but just as her fingers closed around it, Mrs. Kelly's grip clamped down on her wrist. Now, Mrs. Kelly said, her tone mocking but surprisingly calm. That medicine isn't for your sister, dear. It's for you. Emma glanced down at the bottle in her hand, her heart stopping. The label didn't say ipac syrup. It read strychnine for external use only. Mrs. Kelly had been waiting for her to grab it in desperation, deliberately placing it within her reach. You see how cunning desperation makes us? Mrs. Kelly's voice was filled with gentle mockery. You would have poisoned your own sister to save her. But I'm offering you both something much better. Peaceful rest together forever. Dr. Webb had reached the stairs, but just as he began climbing toward the basement door, it slammed shut above him. The sound of a heavy bar being dropped across it echoed through the basement. I'm afraid Mr. Patterson is waiting upstairs, Mrs. Kelly said, noticing Emma's confusion. Sarah's brother-in-law, you remember? He's been helping me with my ministry for several months now. Mrs. Kelly said, her voice steady and calm, betraying no hint of remorse. The drugs affect different people in different ways. Some become docile and peaceful, others become useful. The realization struck Emma like a cold wave. Mrs. Kelly had accomplices among her victims. Even if they could overpower her, they would still have to deal with whoever was guarding the door above. The horror at Mrs. Kelly's boarding house grew deeper, and it felt like there was no way out. If this story is giving you chills, share this video with a friend who loves dark mysteries. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories like this. The sound of Dr. Webb pounding on the basement door echoed through the stone chambers, but it was met only by silence from above. Mrs. Kelly smiled and reached into her apron pocket, pulling out a small vial of clear liquid. "This won't hurt," she said, her tone as gentle as it might be while serving tea to church ladies. "I promise you, dear child, this is the kindest thing anyone has ever done for you." Emma's hand tightened around the strychnine bottle, and in that moment, a terrible idea formed in her mind. If Mrs. Kelly expected her to drink poison, perhaps Emma could use that expectation against her captor. "Wait," Emma said, backing away slowly. "If you're going to kill me anyway, at least tell me the truth. Tell me how this all started. I want to understand." Mrs. Kelly paused, the vial still in her hand. Emma saw the hunger in her eyes, the need to be understood and appreciated for her twisted work. It was the same need that had driven her to preserve her victims' bodies, to arrange them like religious statues, to keep detailed records of their spiritual journeys. "You really want to know?" Mrs. Kelly asked, her voice softening, almost with pleasure. "I do," Emma lied. "I want to understand why you think this is God's work." Mrs. Kelly set the vial down on the table and clasped her hands together, her expression becoming distant and dreamy. "It began with my Patrick," she said. "My dear husband dying of consumption in that terrible hospital in Lynchburg. The doctors said there was nothing they could do, that he would suffer for months before the end came." She moved toward one of the zinc-lined coffins, running her hand lovingly along its edge. "I couldn't bear to watch him waste away, to see him in such agony. So one night, when the pain was particularly bad, I gave him extra laudanum, just a little more than the doctor prescribed, and then a little more the next night, and the next." Emma felt sick as she realized what Mrs. Kelly was confessing. "You killed your own husband?" Emma gasped. "I set him free." Mrs. Kelly corrected, her voice filled with gentle conviction. "And when he died, his face was so peaceful, so serene. I knew then that I had done the right thing. I had given him the greatest gift possible, release from suffering." Behind Mrs. Kelly, Emma saw Dr. Webb moving quietly through the shadows, positioning himself with a crowbar or some other tool. He was preparing to strike, but Emma needed to keep Mrs. Kelly talking just a little longer. "But that doesn't explain all this," Emma said, gesturing toward the preserved bodies. "Why didn't you stop with Patrick?" Mrs. Kelly's expression became radiant, like she was describing a religious vision. "Because I realized that Patrick's death had been a sign from God. I had been chosen to be an angel of mercy, to help other suffering souls find their way to paradise. The lonely, the lost, the forgotten. They would come to me, and I would help them home." "So you opened the boarding house as a trap," Emma said, trying to keep the revulsion from her voice. "As a sanctuary," Mrs. Kelly corrected, smiling sweetly. "A place where weary travelers could find rest. And if that rest became eternal, well, isn't that what we all truly desire, freedom from the pain and uncertainty of mortal existence?" Emma saw Dr. Webb raise the crowbar, preparing to strike, but Mrs. Kelly must have sensed something. She suddenly spun around faster than Emma had expected. Grabbing a heavy candlestick from the table, Mrs. Kelly swung it at Dr. Webb's head. The doctor ducked, but the candlestick grazed his shoulder, sending him stumbling backward. "None of you understand," Mrs. Kelly snarled, her face twisted into a mask of rage. "These people wanted to die. They came to me broken, hopeless, praying for release. I simply answered their prayers." Emma saw her chance. While Mrs. Kelly was focused on Dr. Webb, she lunged forward. She grabbed the vial of poison from the table and moved toward Dorothy, who was still slumped against the wall in the far chamber. But as she passed one of the zinc-lined coffins, a horrifying thought struck her. She remembered the real Epiac bottle she had seen earlier among Mrs. Kelly's medical supplies. If she could find it, she might be able to save Dorothy. But first she had to stop Mrs. Kelly. "Mrs. Kelly," Emma called out, holding up the vial of poison. "You're right. I do want to be free from suffering. I want to join your ministry." The older woman stopped her attack on Dr. Webb and turned toward Emma, her expression brightening with hope. "Do you mean it, child? Do you truly understand what I'm offering you?" "I do," Emma said, unscrewing the top of the vial. "I want to be at peace. I want to stop being afraid." Mrs. Kelly's face lit up with religious ecstasy. "Yes, dear child, let go of your earthly bonds. Let me help you find your way home." But instead of drinking the poison, Emma suddenly hurled its contents directly into Mrs. Kelly's face. The strychnine burned Mrs. Kelly's eyes and mouth, sending her into convulsions of agony. She screamed in pain and rage as she clawed at her face, while Dr. Webb, regaining his balance, grabbed the crowbar again. "The real Epiac," Emma shouted, her voice urgent. "Where is it?" Dr. Webb struck Mrs. Kelly with the crowbar, sending her crashing to the stone floor, then rushed to the medical supply shelves. "Here," he said, tossing Emma a brown bottle. "Force her to drink as much as possible." Emma ran to Dorothy, who was barely conscious, her breathing shallow and erratic. She forced the Epiac down her sister's throat, then held her as Dorothy's body began to convulse, expelling the drugs that had been slowly killing her. Behind them, Mrs. Kelly was crawling toward the stairs, her face a raw mass of chemical burns, her voice reduced to unintelligible moans. Dr. Webb followed her, the crowbar raised ready to strike if needed. "The police!" Emma gasped, still holding Dorothy as her sister vomited. "We have to get the police." "The door upstairs is still barred," Dr. Webb reminded her. "And there's still whoever was helping her." As if summoned by Dr. Webb's words, they heard footsteps above them, followed by a weak, confused voice. "Mrs. Kelly? Mrs. Kelly, is everything all right down there?" Emma realized that Mrs. Kelly's accomplice was probably just another drugged victim following her orders without understanding what he was doing. "Mr. Patterson?" Dr. Webb called up the stairs. "This is Dr. Webb. Mrs. Kelly has been poisoning you. You need to open this door and let us help you." There was a long pause before the sound of the bar being lifted. The door opened, revealing a thin, elderly man with vacant eyes and trembling hands. "Dr. Webb," he said uncertainly. I don't understand." "Mrs. Kelly said you were burglars." "She's been drugging you, Mr. Patterson," Dr. Webb said gently, helping the confused man down the stairs. "She's been drugging all of you, but it's over now. You're safe." Emma looked around the basement at the evidence of Mrs. Kelly's crimes, the preserved bodies, the laboratory, the detailed records of theft and murder. 34 people had died in this place, and Dorothy had nearly become the 35th. Mrs. Kelly lay unconscious on the stone floor, her breathing ragged but steady. She would live to face trial for her crimes, though Emma doubted she would ever be truly punished for the magnitude of her evil. The Richmond police arrived at 1247 Marshall Street at dawn on February 16, 1889. Summoned by Dr. Webb's frantic phone call, what they found in the basement of Mrs. Kelly's boarding house became the most horrific crime scene in Virginia's history. 34 bodies, all perfectly preserved, arranged with the same religious care Mrs. Kelly had given to her husband Patrick's corpse years earlier. The victims ranged in age from 23 to 71, representing dozens of churches and mission societies across the South. Each had been slowly poisoned over weeks or months, while Mrs. Kelly systematically stole their money, their possessions, and their identities. The investigation revealed the full scope of Mrs. Kelly's operation. She had been corresponding with religious organizations throughout Virginia, North Carolina, and Tennessee, identifying potential victims among traveling ministers, missionaries, and church workers. Her method was always the same. Dr. Webb continued his medical practice, but became a strong advocate for better regulation of boarding houses and stricter controls on the sale of dangerous drugs. He testified before the Virginia legislature, pushing for medical oversight of establishments that housed vulnerable populations. The case of Mrs. Kelly's boarding house became a cautionary tale told in churches and seminaries across the country. It served as a reminder that where evil could wear the mask of righteousness, and that the most dangerous predators were often those who appeared the most trustworthy. This mystery reveals that the greatest horrors sometimes don't come from supernatural forces or unknown monsters, but from the darkness that can lurk in ordinary human hearts. Mrs. Kelly's crimes were made possible not by demonic powers or otherworldly forces, but by very human failings, greed, manipulation, and the abuse of trust. What do you think of this story? Do you believe everything was revealed about Mrs. Kelly's methods? Or do you think there were other secrets buried with her? The truth is often more terrifying than fiction, especially when it shows us how thin the line can be between faith and fanaticism, between charity and exploitation. Leave your comment below. Have you ever encountered someone who used religion to mask their true intentions? If you enjoyed this tale and want more horror stories like this, subscribe, hit the notification bell, and share with someone who loves mysteries. These dark chapters of American history remind us that evil can hide behind the most innocent facades, and sometimes the most dangerous monsters are the ones who convince us they're trying to save our souls. See you in the next video. Thank you all very much for watching my video until the end. I sincerely appreciate it, and I look forward to seeing you in the next video.